Let's start our project by defining the basic project settings, just like we did in our previous project. And in order to do so, you will learn how and why to use custom properties in CSS instead of Sass variables. Now, before we start with the code itself, I want to first talk a bit about architecture here. So in this project, I don't want to worry so much about architecture. I'm not going to create all these folders and all these files like I showed you in the last project, okay? Because in the last project, I really wanted to focus on that and make it like an important feature of the project. But this time, all we want to do here is really to learn Flexbox, right? And so all I'm going to do here is to just create 3 very simple files, one for the base settings, one for the overall layout of the app, and one for our smaller components, okay? And that way, we don't have to jump back and forth between all these different files and can focus more on the code. But this doesn't mean that architecture is not important, because it is. But again, the main focus of this project is just to learn Flexbox. Okay, let's now just create these files. So base.scss, then I'm going to create layout SCSS, and then finally components SCSS. All right. And then actually we can copy all of this stuff here into the base file and then import these 3 files into this one, right? Just as we did in the last project. So these 3 files here are our partials, and then we do 3 imports. So import base, and then I'm just going to copy this over. So base, layout, and components. Okay, so let's give this a save and take a look at our page here. And so everything is still working the same. And so our imports here work. And we have our very small and very simple architecture here all set up. Okay, so we're not going to need the main file anymore, neither the component nor the layout files for now. All right, so let's now start with these basic project settings. Okay. And I want to start with the HTML. And the first thing that I want to do is to set the box sizing. And I'm going to do it the exact same way as I did in the other project. So I set it to border box here in the HTML, and then I make everything inherit this property, okay? So the universal selector and also the after and the before pseudo elements. So all the elements, as well as all the before and after pseudo elements, should then inherit the box sizing property set to border box. Okay, so box sizing inherit. All right, and with that we have our global like reset here set up. So the margin to 0, padding to 0, and all the elements inheriting the border box for box sizing. Now the other thing that I need to do, of course, is to set the global font size. And once more, we're going to set it to 62.5%. And remember why that is? Well, this is just so that 1 rem equals 10 pixels, okay? And so that makes it a lot easier for us to work with rems. And just as a reminder why it's 62.5%, that's just because 10 pixels, which is our target, so what we want, divided by 16 pixels, which is the browser default, results in 62.5%. Okay, so this is just a reminder for you in case you have forgotten how we reached this 62.5%. Okay, so that is the HTML. Now we have the body here already, but this background color, of course, was just a test. And so what I really want to set here is the font family. So font family, and as I mentioned, this time we're going to use Open Sans, which once again is coming from Google Fonts. So you see that I already included it here. Okay, so it's coming from Google Fonts. Okay, well, and if that one fails, so if for some reason the browser cannot load Open Sans from Google Font, then we simply tell the browser to use a sans serif font instead. Okay, so that's pretty standard. Now we also set the font weight to 400, and then the line height of the overall document to 1.6. All right, and now we also want that gradient that I showed you. So the color here is gone. Okay, and what we want for the background is basically this gradient going from this pink color here in the top left corner all the way to this darker pink here in the right bottom corner. Okay, so it's basically a gradient going from this side to this side. Oops, sorry, here to this corner with these two pink branding colors that we're using for this app. Okay, so these are the colors that we're going to use, but of course we're not just going ahead and copy these colors down here to the gradient, but instead we're going to use variables just like we did before with SAS variables. Now in this project we are not going to use SAS variables because I want to show you something else, something new in CSS, and that is CSS custom properties, which are better known as CSS variables. So that means that we can actually right now use variables in CSS and don't have to rely on SAS variables. Now, maybe you're wondering what's wrong with SAS variables? Why would we use CSS custom properties or CSS variables? Well, the first thing is, of course, that with CSS variables, you don't even need a preprocessor. So if you're just using SAS for the variables, then you wouldn't need it anymore because CSS can now natively handle CSS variables. But that's of course not the only advantage of CSS variables. What's also really cool is that they can be manipulated in JavaScript, and we can also edit them in our DevTools. Also, it's easier to use CSS variables in the calc function, and also CSS variables cascade and they are inherited. So they are very different from SAS variables in that regard. Okay, so let's now actually use CSS variables or custom properties. Now these custom properties, they have to be defined inside a scope, and so within a declaration block. So just like something like this here, okay? So this is a declaration block, remember. Now we could put these variables just in any normal selector, like any selector that we want. But then these variables would only be available in that element and its children, okay? And that's of course not what we want. Also, it's easier to just have one central place where we collect all the variables in one place, right? And this one place is usually the root pseudo class. So let's write that out. So just like this. So this is the root pseudo class. And this is essentially like the same thing as the HTML selector, but with a higher specificity, okay? So by putting all our variables in here, they will be accessible throughout the entire document, because that's what the root of a document is. It's like the global parent element. And therefore, all the variables we're going to declare here will be available to all the child elements. And this is how we actually declare custom properties. We use double dash, so dash dash, and then the name of the property. So color primary. And now we can copy this part here. All right, and that's it. So you see that it actually works very similar to a normal CSS property, okay? So we have like margin 0, and up here we have our custom property, which is color primary, and then this part here. The only difference is that we use these dash dash in order to distinguish between our custom properties and the normal, like built-in CSS properties. Okay, so let's define the other two primary colors as well. So color primary light, which is this one, and then color primary dark, which is this one. All right, and now we have our custom CSS variables or custom properties. Okay, and so now let's actually go use these properties. And that's how it works. So remember, we want that gradient. So background image, linear gradient, then the direction, actually in here, of course, to right bottom, and then the colors. And this is how we use them. We use the var function, and then in here we call our custom property. So color primary light is the first color, and then color primary dark. And that's it. And now just the background size. Let's set it to cover. And now let's take a look at this. And here we go. Well, it looks a bit weird, but this is actually what we told it to do. Okay, so we set this linear gradient on the body, but right now the body is only really this element here. So this small text that we have here, okay? And so the height of the body is just these 16 pixels. Then from there, the background simply repeats down here. So this is simply the same background over and over again, but repeated. And that's actually the default in CSS. But we can remove that by writing background repeat and set it to no repeat. Okay, and now it should be gone. And here we go. So now the background is only really on the body element itself, just as we specified. Just for now, let's increase this body to cover the entire viewport height, okay? So 100 VH, but we're later gonna remove this one when our element becomes larger than 100 viewport height. Or actually we can do it differently. We can just say min height, okay? And then it happens exactly the way we want, okay? So the minimum height will be 100 VH, but if the height can be bigger than that, well then it will simply be bigger. So this 100 VH is not really like strictly enforced, okay? So let's take a look at that now. And here we go. So now it's covering the entire viewport height because we said that the body should be all of this, so 600 pixels in this case. And now the last thing that I want to define here is the overall text color, okay? So let's actually go up here and create some more variables with these. I'm actually just going to go ahead and copy these here and then just put the dashes here. So I'm going to use multiple cursors here. Dash, dash, gray, light, and then the number here, of course. Okay, and now just these ones. All right, so these are our primary colors. These are a couple of light gray colors, and then the darker gray colors. So this is here is the one that we're going to use for text. Okay, so gray, dark, 2. And actually, let me add color here as well, just as we had here for the primary colors, okay? All right, so color, var color, well, where are the other ones? I want gray dark, 2, I think. Maybe something is wrong here, and yeah, actually it is. So we're missing the semicolons here at the end of the code, right? All right, so that's better now. So hopefully it works now. And yeah, here we go. So it's now this gray color here. Okay, and so these are our basic settings for this project. So we defined some custom CSS properties, which behave just like variables, right? Then we defined our global reset, like with this global box sizing set to border box, and we did our margin and padding set to 0. We defined our global font size so that 1 rem equals 10 pixels to make our life easier. And then we just set these font definitions here, and then our background gradient. Okay, so we're not going to need this file anymore. Let me just close it. And then in the next lecture, it's time to actually start building the overall layout of this project. So let's move on now.